Just I've started the recording, everybody, just so that everyone is aware.
We'll begin in a minute or two, waiting for people to join.
Mary, this is Bill Greeter. I apologize. I'll have to jump off in an hour, but it's not because I'm not interested, but I got a conflict. So
thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Bill, are you representing one of the organizations that's on our agenda as a speaker, or are you attending for interest only?
I guess we'll see how it shakes out. I don't, Vince sent me a message that this was going on, and obviously both as MCA have an interest, and as a homeowner on Tuckernuck, I have an interest also.
All right, well, we know that we're going to have to juggle the agenda, so if there's something that you want to say specific to Tuckernuck, we can put you a little bit earlier, but I don't want to put any pressure on. Yeah.
No, I'm just going to really just try to follow what's going on.
Got it. Thank you, Bill. Okay, so we have six. I think we'll go ahead, call to order this meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. For this meeting, the committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or who acts inappropriately. For members of the public wishing to speak, you would have to send a chat to the chair, Mary Longacre, or to Vince Murphy, town staff, letting us know that you have a comment. Unfortunately, we do not have a raise hand feature in this format. I, Mary Longacre, the chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. To get started, I'll confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me, although we do know that some speakers will be joining us during the meeting, and we will announce them when it is their turn to speak. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. In alphabetical order, Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Graham Durvich, I believe, has not joined us at this time. Matt Fee, I do not see on the screen. Ian Golding, I don't see on the screen. Jen Carberg.
Here.
Fritz McClure.
Here.
Thank you. And staff, Vince Murphy.
Here.
And Holly Backus.
Present.
Thank you. Anticipated speakers on the agenda. So we have hopefully joining us Crocker Snow. Are you there, Crocker?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Are you 718-354-9802?
No, that's me, Dick V.
Oh, Dick, thank you. Sorry about that. Vince, do you see? Oh, there. I'm sorry, Crocker. I see you on the screen. We have quite a few people for me to look through. Thank you for joining us. Do we have Rachel Freeman with us at the moment?
Yep, I'm here.
Right, there you are. Thank you, Rachel.
Hi, Mary.
Good morning. Michael Taylor, I believe, is joining us later. Do we have a representative from the Tuckernuck Landowners Association? Vince, did we get a confirmation on that?
No, we didn't, but I also see Michael Taylor on the screen currently.
Oh, Michael Taylor. Thank you, Michael.
I'm the treasurer of both the Tuckernuck Island Landowners Association as well as the Tuckernuck Land Trust, so I can represent either organization. But I also think I saw Jenny, unless she's one of your committees.
We have three Jennifers today.
Albert.
Which one?
Albert.
Okay. Thank you, Jen Albert. So would you just confirm we can hear you?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. And good
Jennifer
morning.
Alborn for Tuckernuck Land Trust.
Wonderful. And we have Dick Veet with us, who's a property owner on Tuckernuck. We've heard from. Do we have Rich Limeburner joining us?
I don't see him.
I don't see him. Okay. And Emily Molden from the Land Council.
Yes, I am here.
Good morning. Thank you, Emily.
Good morning.
Do we have other people that I haven't named, Vince, who are expected to speak?
No, not that we're on the list. You have everyone that was on the list, but I'm sure with an interest that we have today with 22 participants, I'm sure others will want to speak.
Certainly. All right, moving on. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the Governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. Time permitting, this meeting will feature public comment. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. I'll note that again that we do need to have names on the screen for Zoom. If you're calling in and your phone number is displayed, if it's possible for you to update that display to show your name, that would be very helpful and appreciated. Thank you. Please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to share your screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Before we move to the first item on the agenda, I will cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct. Vince, we have another person that I've just admitted. If you can connect with them to get the name on the screen. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. And please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. And I'll take a moment to remind everyone that public comment can also be submitted by email or directly to Vince Murphy, vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov, or you can give him a call or you can mail him a letter. His contact information is on the town's website. Okay, just again, a quick check. We do have several people who are not displaying a full name. If it says it's your iPad or your organization or your phone number or a nickname, if you can change that display so that your full name is displayed, that would be much appreciated. Thank you in advance. All right, the first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from December 8th. Peter, question.
It'd be helpful to the people whose names need to be changed if you give them a little instruction and tell them up in the top right-hand corner of their screen is where you do it. You click on it and it says, it has a drop-down menu and it says rename, and that's all they have to do.
I hope that is helpful to people. I know that I couldn't have given that advice. Thank you, Peter. And Vince, if you can assist anybody that is not able to do that themselves, thank you. Let's see, Vince, do you want to put the minutes up on the screen? And did any of the committee members have comments or corrections to the minutes of December 8th? Sarah?
Yeah, I just had two things. One is every time Deanne Atherton is named, it's just Ann, so it's Deanne Atherton. As you can see, she's on the screen right now, so you can just copy that text. And then the only other thing I had was under the education subcommittee report. I didn't really mean to say that, like the way it's worded, it sounds like I said that the responsibility of communication was the entire group and not the education subcommittee. What I meant, or what I thought I said, was I was proposing that the work of the education committee be enveloped by the full group, because we were losing the only other 2 members of the education subcommittee. So I just wanted to be kind of clear in the notes that I wasn't, I didn't think it wasn't the responsibility of the education subcommittee, that I wanted to let the group know that we were losing our members, and so it should be part of the full group.
Beg your pardon, Mary, if I may. Is this where you mean, Sarah, and what would you like it to say?
I don't think that's the correct spot. Maybe further down, Vince?
Yeah, so so under the committee reports, which is on the next page, so it says that I thought that the communication was the responsibility of the entire group. I would change that to Sarah Boyce reported that the other 2 members of the education subcommittee were leaving, and I was proposing that education and, sorry, I'll wait.
Yeah, I'll correct this properly after. Pardon my spelling mistakes. Are leaving and proposing. And
I was proposing to envelop education and communication to the full group. Or the full committee, sorry. And the only reason I think that change is important too is because we then put a line item in today's agenda, so that if you're reading these minutes, it makes more sense.
Are you happy with this now as highlighted?
I don't know what the proper term is for they're like leaving the subcommittee. They're not leaving the overall committee, but that Mary and Graham are
the subcommittee.
Leaving the subcommittee. Thank you. Subcommittee instead of sun committee, but
thank you.
It's just fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Other comments or corrections to the minutes? And if I'm not seeing you, feel free to speak out, committee members. A lot of people on the screen. All right, hearing no additional revisions, do we have a motion to adopt the minutes of December 8th?
They get adopted.
Thank you, Gary. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jennifer. Roll call vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace. Peter, can we hear your vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre votes aye. So that's adopted. I think it's 6-0. And Vince, if you see any more committee members enter, would you let me know? We have one individual, R. Lime, identified on the screen. You can also send a chat message to me or Vince with your full name, and we are able to rename you for this session.
Beg pardon, Mary, if I may.
Yes, Vince.
So if anyone just wants to tell me their name and I can correct it for them, that's fine. I was hoping that Liz Trilos could have joined by now. It seems like
she did, or she's trying to.
She's trying to, but it's about the 5th, 6th time I've admitted her. So it looks like she's having trouble is my point.
Okay. All right, so the next item on the agenda is a brief demonstration from Vince of the FEMA Region 1 erosion hazard maps. The report is finally available for those, and Vince is just going to give a quick demo of what the tool does and how it works. And hopefully this will work on the screen share.
Yes, it will, and thank you, Mary. Mary, if I could ask, while I'm doing this for the 3 or so minutes this will take, could you admit people,
yes.
please?
Yep.
So I'm just going to share my screen. I'm going to start with a little bit of history first. People will likely have seen me show these before, but I'm putting these up for Tuckernuck and Muskeget just so people can see shoreline change from 1844 approximate time period up to the current layout of Tuckernuck and Muskeget as erosion have shaped them over the last 170, 80 years or so. These maps are things that have been produced by CZM and get updated periodically. The last update was 2007 to 2009 update. It also shows shoreline transects for erosion. I've showed these in the past, and then there are numbers with these transects, and for most of the western part of the island, you'll see it's a negative number, negative 11.19 on this case. So it's eroding at around 11 feet per year for the sake of argument. This is relevant to show you because I'm going to now go to the new maps. Oh, I pressed stop sharing and I didn't mean to. It's a bar at the top of the screen, I apologize. So come on. Pardon me. So we have a website, a town website for the coastal erosion hazard maps. This has been up since FEMA Region 1 launched these maps earlier this year. Last week, we finally got the report and I had that added to the website. It's at the bottom of this. I'm in the process of having this linked to the CRAC and various other websites as well. Other pages on the town website as well. What we need to do is click on this map, then go to the link at the bottom and follow that.
I find my iPad, I can hear it just okay.
Agree and close, zoom in, and we'll just look at the western end of the island just for the sake of argument for now. This doesn't cover Tuckernuck and Muskeget, sadly. The default settings on this shows, it takes sea level rise into account, and the default setting shows the intermediate high scenario. People might remember that the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee made a recommendation to the Select Board, which then became a policy, and the policy says to use the high sea level rise scenario. So we just switch to that. This is a worst case scenario of sorts, but it is potentially quite realistic. So let's bear that in mind. If I could just ask people to mute, please. So I'm just going to zoom in the Madaket area just for the sake of a place that could be worst affected. Sadly, this doesn't show the case for Tuckernuck and Muskeget. The dashed line shows the shoreline as it was in 2017 when consultants were out and mapped the shoreline at that point. They then projected forward using the historical data as well as other information that they collected on the ground. The information they collected on the ground was the beach shape, topography, wave runoff, bank, sand dune, what was present, the bank material, and the erosion possibilities of that type of material. Then they used all of that together with the historic data to project forward in 3 increments, 2030 to 2050 and to 2100. 2030, only 10 years away. And this is what the area could look like. 2050, which is about the average length of a mortgage, so 30 years from now. And this would then be able to advise as to what you might or might not purchase in this area for the risk in the lifetime of your mortgage, potentially. To 2100, goes quite far inland. That's roughly about 2,000 feet. Just for the sake, I've measured it earlier just to be able to say on the Madaket Road, it goes inland roughly about that distance. It's about 1,950. So this is a nice map, but it's a currently in progress map. Nantucket was one of the first parts of the United States to have this done, and it was FEMA Region 1 who have undertaken this. This is eventually going to get rolled out for the entire eastern seaboard and then nationally on the western seaboard and Gulf coasts as well. The point is, FEMA famously produces the FIRMS maps, the flood insurance rates maps, which are regulatory maps, and you must, if you're building within a flood zone, know what your risk is and be insured accordingly, as FEMA has outlined. These are not regulatory yet, these are advisory. There's no need to pay attention to it unless you want to. You'd be foolish not to if you had a house in one of these zones. The point is that within the next number of years, I don't have a timeline, these will become regulatory. They'll have to get an increase in sensitivity and an increase in the type of data that's presented, because 3 timeframes isn't enough as such. When you compare it to the FEMA flood zones, which have many distinct layers up to, what is it, the 10-foot layer, and even up to the 1 in 500-year flood layer. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
And again, for members of the public, send the chair, Mary Longacre, a chat message, or Vince Murphy a chat message to let us know if you have comments you want to offer. Thank you, Vince, for that presentation. So not seeing any requests for public comment, we'll go on to the main part of the presentation today, which is the discussion of the climate change effects and concerns on Tuggernuck and Muskeget. Our first speaker is Crocker Snow, who is a property owner on Muskeget and has a lifetime of experience there. Crocker, would you like to give us your view of what's going on in Muskeget in terms of erosion, flooding, and sea level rise, and also a perspective on what you think might be appropriate in the future, whether measures should be taken to increase coastal resilience there?
Okay, can everybody hear me fine?
We can. Thank you, Crocker.
Okay, great. Well, it's nice to be part of this and see what's going on. The Muskeget story is pretty simple. I assume many of you have been there, and those who have not been there have been by, and what I'm going to tell you is not a big surprise, I don't think. I honestly don't think there's anything that can really be done to stop the erosion at Muskeget. It is now about 250 acres in total. The highest point of land on the entire island is about 15 feet above sea level. There's no real trees on it. There's a lot of brush and cedar brushes and things of that kind, awful lot of poison ivy, of course. But in the many years that I have been there, or going there since I was 9 years old, I have seen some dramatic change, and it looks like inexorable erosion. The island is moving slowly towards Nantucket, i.e. towards the east. That's obvious in my lifetime. And the sort of sand bluffs and sand dunes that were mostly on the north side of the island, along the north shore, have been step by step either going into the sea, many have, or those that are still surviving are being sort of knocked down step by step by the current, the wind, everything else that the island is buffeted with natural forces. The two possibly fresh things that I could mention are, number one, my observation is, can you all hear me fine still?
Yes, thank you.
Good. My observation is that the explosion of gray seals there during the December, January, February, mid-March period, many of you have read about it, and it has gone from virtually none over in the mid-60s to 200 perhaps in the early 70s, late 70s, to give or take 10,000 now during this period of time. And they are going, there are so many there now during the breeding period and birthing period, they both happen at the same period of time, that they are covering the entire island. They used to be very close to the shore, within 7,500 yards, and now you can find them pretty much all over the island. Not as many, but they need some space when they're birthing, and therefore the territorial imperative has pushed more and more of the cows inland, where they give birth, and then the bulls go inland to find them. The effect of that is that they are in their natural process knocking down a lot of the vegetation in the island, some of which comes back each year, some of which doesn't, and absolutely are making what I think of as beaver runs from the bigger dunes that they have to go up to get into the inland part of the island when they're going back to the ocean. Whether it's the bulls, the cows, or the pups that are doing the best they can to get there. They're left alone for 3 weeks. Some make it, some don't. But it's pretty obvious to me, and it's obvious in several films that have made of this, that is changing the topography of the island somewhat, and negatively in terms of protecting the land. Now, what can be done about that is, that's a big discussion, and certainly nothing can be done unless there's some kind of a alteration in the Marine Mammal Protection Act, because the gray seals are protected by that, unlike the Endangered Animal Act, which is at the same period of time. And the number of seals on Muskeget during this period of time right now is still growing. It's growing to my eyes, and it's growing in the eyes of the NOAA people that are watching it either on land, this year only by plane, but they are acknowledging privately that this is not plateaued yet. And there are various reasons for this. Number one, they're very isolated and they want to be isolated when they give birth. Number two, most of you know that there's so much shallow water around Muskeget that great whites cannot get near the island. And it's pretty obvious to me that the seals have figured this out, and or at least some of them. And the analogy of golf course geese, some golf course geese that just don't migrate any longer. And it seems pretty obvious that that's happening. So that
Crocker, if I may ask a question.
Sure.
I apologize for interrupting.
Muskeget
has a status as a sanctuary. I'm forgetting the correct designation. Could you remind me of that?
No, we've got a conservation restriction with the Nantucket Land Bank, and it is a natural landmark, but it is no sanctuary.
Okay, it's not a wildlife refuge or anything.
No.
Okay, thank you. Apologize.
And I know much more than you would want to know about this whole subject of the gray seal growth and what could or could not be done about it. I won't get into that right now, but I do have I feel pretty confident in stating that the number of seals there and how they're using the island is one of the major issues on the erosion of the island right now, because the beach grass has been knocked down. 2 of the 3 freshwater ponds on the island have been are no longer exist, and surprisingly, starting about 5 years ago, it's a very small number, but some of the gray seals go into the freshwater ponds to get sanctuary themselves. And according to the seal scientists, that's the first time they've known about seals giving birth in near freshwater ponds. They don't even do that in Sable Island off Nova Scotia. So there's a fascinating series of different things happening. But the seals are the one thing that I think is in the middle of your discussion. there is one other thing I'll mention, and I honestly don't know if it's serious or not, but there are several scientists who also are charlatans to a degree that were convinced that they had developed something that could be put between the sand and keep fresh water and salt water separated. That's the simple way to put it. They started doing that near Madaket. They got thrown off Nantucket. They ended up in Muskeget, and I threw them off there, but they have demonstrated that process to some satisfaction. And why would that have some serious impact on a place like Muskeget is it appears to me that I would not call them bluffs, but let's say 10 to 12 feet protecting the freshwater ponds from the sea, those have been knocked down too, both by erosion, by wind, by hurricanes, and by the seals. And that is added to the process that I have described. And anyway, it strikes me, my simple conclusion is that what you are doing with your committee will not really have any real or imagined impact on Muskeget. That nature is in charge, and it's going to be almost impossible to change the process that nature itself is undertaking. You've asked for my prediction, and I think the island is going to keep getting smaller, keep moving towards the east slightly. And I would assume that by the next century that there'll be very little of the island left, maybe a quarter of what's there now. And, you know, that's what I would predict happening, maybe a third of what's there now.
Thank you, Crocker. I appreciate that. We also have Rachel Freeman from the Land Bank. They are also a property owner on Muskeget. Rachel, do you want to offer the Land Bank's perspective on Muskeget's future and current situation?
Sure. Thank you, Mary. I would like to second what Crocker said in that, our understanding is really that Muskeget is likely to continually decrease in size, and the coastal resiliency in efforts in this area are not something that we're necessarily going to undertake. We're looking towards allowing nature to take its course, and whatever that is. The Land Bank owns the western end of the island, and if you even look in recent maps, that shape has changed quite a bit and shrunk quite a bit, but that's not something we're necessarily overly concerned about. It is just what it is. So I think that is, there's no infrastructure. There might be, it might be being overused by gray seals. That is possibly true. But at this point, we are not looking to intervene in any way. So.
Thank you, Rachel. And we will also have Emily Molden speak later on the topic of the conservation restrictions in general, which would include Muskeget and Tuckernuck. Michael Taylor, are you available from the Tuckernuck Land Trust? We can juggle the order of speaking because we know that some people are going to be going in and out. We might have lost Michael, or Vince, do you see him on the screen?
No, I do not currently.
Okay, so I think we have lost him temporarily. Hopefully he will be able to return. Can I call on Dick Veach to speak? Dick, are you available?
Can you?
Yes,
can you
now
hear
we can
me?
hear you. Yes,
okay.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Michael Taylor's on the ferry right now, and I think he's gone out of range. Yeah, I'll talk about Tuckernuck. About Muskeget, I would give one positive development that has to do with the sort of pattern of erosion, and that is just in the last year specifically, roseate terns, which are the federally endangered tern that sometimes nest in this area, have begun nesting on their own there. This is a process that's gone on over the last few years, and the place where they nested last year is the far western part of the island, which wasn't there before. It's a creted sandbar that's connected to Muskeget and now provides habitat for these endangered birds. So again, I'm not suggesting that there's something that this group could do to affect the erosion or accretion in that area, but just to put in perspective something that's happening with wildlife out there. For Tockernock, Richard Lineburner has hard data on what I'm going to say, and I would defer to him. But I believe the measurements he made showed an average of 40 horizontal feet per year erosion on the south shore, particularly the southwest shore of Tockernock. And they're the maps that Andy Sheaf sent in and Google Earth Maps very clearly show this. My family's property is on the westernmost part of the island, and that was 48 acres in 1974 or something like that, is now about 17 acres. And my house, which is adjacent to that property, I figure is going to go over the bluff in, I'll make a guess, 20 years, something like that. So this is a very obvious concern to Tockernock landowners. Also, most of the erosion is on the south ocean side of the island, and the habitat there are sandplain grasslands, which have a number of endangered and threatened species of birds and wildflowers. So that's another conservation concern. I'm not sure what else I can add. I talked at length with Vince Murphy on Friday, and we looked at a couple of issues, and one was the installation of the possible installation of a culvert that would allow for residents of some houses to access the rest of the island in the event of, or the inevitable event of continued ocean sea level rise. And I mean, that sounds very reasonable and something that could be done within the purview of this committee. Also, I'm sitting right now on Whale Point on the south side of Tockernock, which has changed enormously due to accretion of sand, and there's habitat for a number of beach nesting birds and roosting seals here. The idea of planting beach grass to stabilize the dunes is something that could be done, and I would support that. Beyond that, I kind of agree with Crocker that there isn't an awful lot that anyone can do about slowing the erosion here, but small steps like that to help stabilize some of the dunes that might build up to something else in the future would be something useful to do. There isn't anything else right off the top of my head I could say, but I'm happy to address any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you, Dick. Why don't we go straight to Richard Lineburner, and I'm going to try and go through all of the representatives before we ask questions. Some may be able to answer them. So thank you.
Okay.
Richard?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
So I think that what's really important to realize is that Nantucket and the islands are located on a boundary between two separate bodies of water. One is the North Atlantic Ocean and the other is Nantucket Sound. And there's very, very different physical characteristics of those two environments. For instance, the tides are 6 hours earlier on the south side of Tockernock compared to the north side. And if you're going to solve any problems, the solution on one side of the island is probably going to be different than the solution on the other side of the island. Second, there's shoals to the northeast of Tockernock, and there's large shoals to the east of Nantucket. And they have a very protective effect on both islands. However, those shoals are constantly shifting and sea level rise. I'd expect the structure of those shoals would change. In general, I see two big problems, and there's flooding in downtown Nantucket right now that's becoming more and more frequent. And then there's incredible erosion on the south side of the islands, on the ocean side. And I've measured off my land for 15, 20 years, and I lose on average 42 feet a year. 2 years ago, I gained 300 feet. A year ago, I lost 250 feet. So there's a lot of variability. But if you look, I mean, I did it for about 15 or 20 years for my land, but I also went back and I found historic maps in the mid 1800s. I found photographs in the Nantucket Historical Association that I've relocated on top of satellite images today. And over a long period of time, 42 feet a year actually holds up quite well, at least for the last 80 years. So those are the two big problems. There's lots of smaller problems. NOAA actually predicts Tuckernuck will be 5 islands by the year 2100. And I don't really see any solutions to these problems. I mean, stopping the North Atlantic Ocean with sea level rise is not going to be done unless you want to spend a lot of money. And I don't think that the EPA would allow some of the possible solutions. So, but for instance, I look at New Bedford, which is not very far away, and 30 years ago, they addressed the same problem and they solved it. And they built a hurricane floodgate. They built a big berm barrier across the mouth of New Bedford Harbor. And there's a huge hurricane gate that they close when there's a hurricane. And Nantucket could do that. You could build a big barrier between Monomoy and where the Sea Cliff Inn used to be, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. So I don't have any answers, but I think it's going to be a difficult problem to solve. And I'd like somebody on the committee eventually to explain what this consulting company in the Netherlands is doing.
Thank you, Richard. So I just want to double check. I don't think we have Michael back at this point. Before we go on to talking about conservation restrictions, Rachel, I see you want to make a comment, and then we'll open up to committee members and then the public for comments on Tuckernuck and Muskeget.
Thank you, Mary. I had a question regarding the maps that you've developed for Tuckernuck and where I can easily access them and whether or not that's something of interest to the rest of the committee. I've seen them, but I feel like it would be great to know where we could go to, or where people could go to find them.
And I'm sorry, Rachel, who are you addressing that question to?
Mr. Lineburner.
Yeah,
Thank
probably.
you.
So I do have a website I created which shows some measurements of tides at about 8 different locations around Tuckernuck. And the one map that I sent Vincent that you might have seen, Rachel, is not published anywhere, but I can put it on that website, or possibly Vincent could put it somewhere where it could be distributed. And any other maps, I do have a few of them. At some point, I remember Bam Lafarge used to refer to William Sturgis Bigelow's residence. And I used to sit at the West End and wonder where it was. And so that's when I went back to the Nantucket Historical Association photographs of 1938. And I could overlay them on Google Earth, and I could show where Bigelow's house was located. And I was surprised that it was so far offshore to the southwest. But anyway, so the answer is I will contact Vincent and we can put something on a website.
And the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee does have a library of resources page on the town website. We'd be happy to add it there. And if there are other appropriate spots, thank you, Richard, for offering that information.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Are there questions or comments from committee members so far? Yeah, I'm not seeing any. Oh, Sarah, please.
Oh yeah, I just had a quick comment, you know, to Rachel's point about where we can get the maps. It's also interesting for Arcadis, and as they work on the plans, to have this information as well for Tuckernuck and Muskeget. So just throwing it out there, you know, either making sure they get the information that we could report out to them, or, you know, I don't know what their availability to have similar discussions as we are right now with Tuckernuck and Muskeget representatives. So just throwing it out there.
Yeah, Vince, if you want to address that, and also you can add a response to Richard's question about Arcadis.
Sure. Thank you, Mary. So one of the first things I do, Sarah, every time I come across new data is to say, please can I share and please can I use? And that was one of the questions I posed to Richard Lineburner when we first started communicating, and his response was yes. So Arcadis already have this map. I was able to just forward it. The downside is that it takes time to get things on the town website, particularly Christmas week, I'm sorry to say. But I'm already working on it, and I can happily say that that is very much on the cards, and I'll continue to press to get that done. To address Mr. Lineburner's other question about who are these consultants, this Dutch company, I'll go back in time a little bit. The Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, together with myself, put together an RFP, request for proposals. We started this time last year, and we were just about ready to advertise in March before there was a sudden hiatus. And then we did get the advertisement, the posting up in May, and that was up for about 6 weeks. And then in July and into August, we were in the process of selecting companies who had submitted proposals. 7 companies submitted. Each was reviewed and ranked by a panel of 5. And Arcadis came out on top. Not to say anything about the other companies, there were some excellent submissions, but they were in some ways head and shoulders above the others, which were also good submissions. So Arcadis were chosen. They are a Dutch-based company. They're based in the Netherlands and have offices throughout North America. The best examples that I can provide for people of their work is to look at the Boston Coastal Resilience Plan, which they did. Also the New York one. It was for, sorry, not New York as such, it was from Manhattan Island. They undertook the Coastal Resilience Plan for that community as well. And they have done similar plans and hazard mitigation type plans for communities throughout the country. They are extremely well experienced. I am also sorry to say I was hoping to have a Coastal Resilience Plan page on the town website. The consultants provided me that information last week, and I sent an email to community members Friday evening apologising that the information has not gone up. Otherwise, I'd be able to provide it out and give more information on Arcadis and the plan. But getting things done sometimes takes time within a municipality, and I can only apologise and work to get it done.
Vince, do we have on our page a link to either Arcadis's proposal or the RFP? I'm trying to remember what we have available that might be useful.
Again, I'm sorry to have to apologise. I have asked more than once now at this point for the RFP to be put in the library and then linked to the CRAC page. It has not happened yet, and I'll continue to chase that. Okay. And I'm sorry for the delay.
Perhaps you can provide something to Richard by email to assist in the meantime.
Yes.
And of course, to anyone else who has questions about the process for generating the Coastal Resilience Plan, reach out to Vince V. Murphy at nantucket-ma.gov. And I don't think Michael has been able to rejoin yet. Probably be another half an hour before he's in port. So can we turn to, is there anyone from the public who has a question about Tuckernuck or Muskeget or has a comment that they want to offer? And again, if I can't see you on the screen, you can send me a chat message letting me know that you want to speak. Sean Coleman, can we unmute Sean?
Yeah.
Great, thank you, go ahead.
I think one thing that the configuration of the island has allowed for the past 30 years is a is a landing, and I think it's actually important because it's a private landing, but it actually operates as I think the public landing in case we needed emergency services. So I think it might be wise to see if we can actually allow for a projected location for an emergency service landing. And I represent the Lafarges, and we're one of the larger landowners on the island. And I think in the past, Walter Barrett's dock many years ago was on our land. So just curious about what this conversation might look like. Because it might be that this is by sort of the Great Rock on the east end of the island. It has strong tides, but I'm curious where people would land. Then we also happen to own the North Landing, the old Brooks Landing. It's pretty shallow water there. I don't think it would work, but just love to be able to say that it's an important conversation to have at some point.
And that's a good point. One of the objectives of the Coastal Resilience Plan is not just to protect the island, but also to provide other benefits such as, public amenities, emergency access. Those are all definitely part of the scope of the plan. So thank you for bringing that up. Other questions or comments from the public? If not, then I'll go to you, Vince. I am not seeing any. Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you very much, Mary. So I had a bit of a look through the report we got from Alona McBroom, the strategies document last January, and I tried to see how that might apply and what methods we could use from that document to apply to Tuckernuck. I'm sorry to say the list was short, and I mentioned some of these to Dick Beat in our conversation on Friday, and this is one of the things that came up. Connection to Nantucket, Malacate Harbour basically, is one of the big things, and we had a conversation about landing points on Tuckernuck, and I'm delighted to see that Sean brought that up, and alternative points was another thing that I was looking at for landing for emergency events. I don't have a solution to that yet, but it's just one of the things I'm bearing in mind. One of the other big things that wasn't already discussed is nourishment on the south-facing shore. It wouldn't be anything more than to slow down erosion by a few years. Look at a nourishment cycle. The problem with Tuckernuck is that there's no public land as such to do that on it. We would require the agreement of many or all the landowners in the south-facing shore. This is just a potential idea. This could be something that could be worked into the Coastal Resilience Plan, and that would be the kind of thing where we would need feedback from people on island.
Thank you, Vince. I want to make sure, Jennifer Alborn, did you have anything that you wanted to add on behalf of the Tuckernuck Landowners Association?
So I'm with the Tuckernuck Land Trust.
I'm sorry, I had a 50-50 shot. I apologize. I picked the wrong one.
No, I don't. Thank you. Several of our board members have spoken already, and they're the ones who have the sort of on the ground observation and experience with the land. Thank you.
Could I say one more thing, Mrs. Dick V?
Yes, Dick. Please go
ahead. Just what Vince just said. I forgot to mention this. There's been an issue with Tuckernuck residents parking in Madaket when they come over for multiple days to Tuckernuck. For a long time, we had an arrangement to park at Jackson Point. Then the harbor master built the shack there that covers most of the parking lot, and there are very few parking spaces there now. So there was an arrangement with a land bank to use their parking lot down by H Street. There have been some issues, and that is no longer available. So particularly if with rising sea level, the under Millie's Bridge there breaks through and Jackson Point's no longer available, there seems likely to be a continuing lack of parking for Tuckernuck residents. And I thought that was something this committee might address.
Thank you, Dick. I was actually going to make a similar point, and that is, while we need to maintain access on Tuckernuck, it's a two-sided road. We need to have a departure point maintained, probably in Mattocket, for access to Tuckernuck to be successful. So that's definitely on the radar. But thank you, Dick, for bringing that up. Other comments or questions? And if I've missed anybody, my apologies. I'm happy to include you in the conversation. Okay, let's move on to Emily Molden. Emily's going to speak more generally about conservation restrictions, but those are certainly something that are in effect on Muskeget and on Tuckernuck. And the question is, how would we integrate coastal resilience measures with properties which were protected by a conservation restriction, and what opportunities are available? Thank you. Please go ahead, Emily.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So, so the Nantucket Land Council has had a conservation restriction program since the mid-'80s. Our first conservation restriction was actually recorded in 1986 on a Tuckernuck property. We spent a lot of time focusing on Tuckernuck because of the really important conservation values and habitat over there that have been protected with the help of all the property owners. We now have, I believe, 90 CRs in total across Nantucket, and including on Tuckernuck and Muskeget. I think there's 25 that are on Tuckernuck alone, and they certainly vary in size. The conservation restriction is, generally speaking, an important land protection tool that is used across the country, and they're actually called conservation easements outside of Massachusetts. For some reason, Massachusetts chooses to call them conservation restrictions, but the rest of the country refers to them as conservation easements. So sometimes that creates a little bit of confusion. They essentially are permanently protect some predetermined conservation values on a parcel of land, and the conservation values are protected by restricting development or certain activities in some way. So the restriction itself is essentially an interest in the property that is held by this third party, either a land trust or a government entity in certain cases, while the remaining interest of the property remains with the property owner. So CRs are not public. They are most often private properties. There are some certain exceptions. The land bank owns a number of properties that have conservation restrictions on them, permanently restricting certain activities. And then also similarly, the Linda Loring Nature Foundation property is permanently protected by a conservation restriction that also is open to the public. But whether or not a property is open to the public is really determined by the property owner themselves. CRs can be required by permits. So for example, the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, if they're issuing a conservation management permit for development, they may choose to use a conservation restriction as a mitigation tool. So if there's going to be some kind of development on land that's mapped as priority habitat for rare and endangered species, they may allow a certain portion of the property to be built upon and then require another portion to be protected permanently by a conservation restriction. So we do hold a number of CRs across the island that are permit requirements. There also are sometimes required as part of a planning board special permit for a cluster subdivision, now called flex development, where there's a component of open space that's required to offset some additional building lots. So we do hold a number of those around the island as well on some of our cluster subdivisions. And they also can be purchased. And then also actually the Conservation Commission has used them in the past as a tool, as a requirement in their order of conditions. We actually have one, the old Egan property, which is between Mattocket Road and sort of off of Crooked Lane. Now the land bank owns a portion of it at this point in time, but that there was a permit issued for that property years ago to allow for some trails, and as mitigation in the order of conditions, they required that the property be permanently protected with a conservation restriction. So the Concom's actually used it as a mitigation tool as well. They can be purchased. That's often done as a bargain sale. We haven't done that very much on Nantucket, but the best example is some of the Bartlett Farm property and also the Linda Loring Nature Foundation property. We purchased that CR from Linda Loring for a bargain price back in 2007. Oftentimes those CRs are donated by a conservation-minded property owner that wants to protect certain interests or aspects of their property in perpetuity. They naturally reduce the value of the property by typically restricting development of some sort. And so the donations of this conservation interest can then often be tax deductible. And as such, the IRS has now developed some very strict standards and requirements of CRs, especially around claiming them as a deduction. So a lot of the formal process of drafting the CR and the requirements that are a part of it are dictated by IRS requirements as well. The general layout of them is that they have a section of prohibited uses. So there's a lot of broad brush prohibitions for the property. And then there's a specific section of reserved rights. And those are really very specific to the property. Every CR is drafted quite different. They're all unique based on the property itself, the conservation values that the CR is protecting, and the owner's wishes for the property long-term in the future. And oftentimes there may be a building envelope that's designated for a future structure, and then the remainder of the property may be permanently protected. So then those specific reserved rights are activities that are still allowed on the CR in the future. The IRS standards and drafting guidelines have changed over the years. So the restrictions that were drafted in the 80s look a little bit different than they do today, but generally the formatting is quite similar. So the Land Council CRs span across the island, and we have a number of coastal properties that are protected by conservation restrictions. RJ has gone ahead and worked up a list of the CRs that are most likely to be impacted by coastal processes, sea level rise in the future. And we just provided that list to Vince and to Mary to share with Arcadis, really just looking at sort of elevation of 20 feet or so and below, just as at least a starting point. I think that because all of the properties are considered individually and independently when the CRs are drafted, the language in them is different with regard to how sea level rise or erosion may impact the property and what can be done about it. Some of them address it very specifically, some not so much. I can give everyone some specific examples, certainly. There's some properties that have a specific envelope designated to relocate the house in the future. We had one restriction that was placed in 1990 up in Wawinit, and in 1995, there was an amendment to the restriction because it became obvious that the house was going to have to move, and so there was a designated location identified for the house to relocate in the future. So on more recent restrictions, some of those are built in already. There often is language where if the property owner wishes to do some kind of erosion control or protection, they have to do so in coordination with and with approval of the grantee, which is the Land Council. So sometimes there are those reserved rights that allow for coastal protection, but in consultation and prior approval with the Land Council first. There are some that specifically prohibit certain types of coastal engineering structures because the property owner does not want to use hard armoring. There's one on the North Shore off of Washing Pond Road that specifically identifies that there shall be no revetment, bulkhead growing, or geotubes. That's the only property that I can think of where that was specifically written into the restriction, but it often is dictated by the property owner's wishes for the property as well. But all the conservation restrictions have to go to the state for review and sign off by the Secretary of EOEEA. And they also are approved by the select board and signed off by the select board to ensure that there is some public benefit for the protection. So again, I do certainly have a number of different examples that I can give, and I'm happy to answer questions that folks have. We just recently recorded one, actually last week, I think, on out in Mattakit. 31 Starbuck Road is a coastal property where that was purchased. The house was removed. It was definitely going to be threatened by erosion in the next 5 to 10 years. And it was permanently protected. And certainly one of the public benefits of that is as a coastal buffer to additional structures and upland resources. And that was specifically identified and listed in the conservation restriction. As far as how we can help going forward, I'm certainly very interested in working with CRAC, and as policies for the island are developed, starting to communicate those to property owners that are interested in protecting their properties. I would say that as kind of the general background or basis, they essentially can be treated or considered like any other private property on the island for the most part. But I am very happy to answer any questions that folks have and help out in any way.
Emily, you mentioned that you can modify a conservation restriction. Is that only when the original owner is still living? Is there any difficulty if ownership has changed hands?
No, it can be done under new ownership. I will say amendments to conservation restrictions are very unusual and really only considered in pretty extreme circumstances. The purpose of a CR is for it to be in perpetuity. There's pretty high standards that have to be met in order to amend the CR. So the one I spoke of before that was amended to allow the house to relocate, because we were designating a new envelope for that structure to move to, that property owner had to donate additional unprotected property so that there would be an overall net benefit to the conservation of the property in order for that to go through.
And in the possible, I'm definitely not trying to point any fingers, but in the possibility that a property's conservation restriction prohibited a coastal resilience measure, but without that property being involved in a larger neighborhood effort, the effort itself would fail. Would that be a cause of sufficient public benefit that the restriction could be removed so that the entire coastal resilience measure, whatever it might be, could be put in place and be effective?
The restriction itself can't be removed. Okay. I would say that on a case-by-case basis, if there was a concern about some structure that needed to be placed there, it would just be addressed on a case-by-case basis. But I mean, generally it will be quite similar to any other private property owner who may have a specific wish, desire, or not for their property. Certain measures, certainly like planting beach grass or native species, that is very different than installing a bulkhead or a seawall. But they're really, I can't think of a lot of places where I can see that being a concern, but certainly we would just address it as case by case as it came up, as policies were established in different parts of the island.
Okay, other questions or comments? Fritz, I see your hand up.
Yeah, yes, Mary, to Emily, through you. I had a similar question, but I just maybe a refinement of it. So, Emily, in those cases where a conservation restriction on coastal land might be fairly strict, are you saying that it's basically whether or not a change can be made is at the discretion, although there's a standard, I understand that, but it is in all cases at the discretion of the restriction holder?
Yes, for the most part. Generally,
or ask it another way: if coastal resilience could get the land council to go along with it, could it always be accommodated?
I guess it depends on what that looks like and what the impacts to the other conservation values of the property are going to be. So it's really hard. It's hard.
I understand you have your own limitations under law, but just basically, do you have the power? You have the power to do it. Yeah.
Well, and again, because the conservation restrictions are pretty individual for each property, depending on the language of the restriction and what was written in would determine on whether or not an actual amendment would be required for an activity to take place. And if an amendment was required, then even beyond just the grantee, it would have to get signed off on by the state and the select board. There's one property off of Cliff Road on the North Shore that was a requirement of Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program. And so they are certainly involved in the compliance of that restriction over time. And there's specific language in that one that allows for shoreline stabilization with written permission of the Division of Fish and Wildlife. So they need to be involved because they want to make sure that as that restriction was required for mitigation to protect certain rare and endangered species values, that any kind of shoreline stabilization isn't going to have a negative impact on those values as well. So they're, again, it's just going to depend a little bit on the property or the region.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions or comments from committee members? Okay, seeing none. Michael Taylor, were you able to rejoin us? We can return to your spot on the agenda.
Oh, yes, I just got a clear signal. So, I missed the section from Crocker Snow with the gray seals up to Emily's the section. But Emily was just talking about erosion control measures, or implying that there could be some erosion control measures that people would consider. I would think that most of the Tuckernuck community would be against anything like they're doing in Sconset, geotubes, putting up fencing. The only thing that I could possibly see the Tuckernuck community supporting is the planting of beach grass on places like Whale Point or Biglis Point, or maybe in certain sections of the South Shore of Tuckernuck, a place called Charlie's Point, where there's like new sand. So was there a discussion at all? Were people sort of considering some more dramatic erosion control measures?
I don't think we heard any support in that area. To recap what I have in my notes, the concerns would be maintaining access to Tuckernuck, maintaining access on Tuckernuck to all of the individual properties, planting beach grass, stabilizing the dunes potentially, but not much else could be done to stop erosion. There's a difference between the North Shore and the South Shore. The shoals on the South Shore are protective but impermanent. Erosion on the South Shore is highly variable. And the need to maintain a public landing and emergency access to Tuckernuck. I think that's a short synopsis of what we have heard so far.
For all those concerns. The only thing to add is if Hither Creek breaches and Jackson Point is no longer, I'm not so sure the Walter Barra Pier will be sufficient to accommodate both the Tuckernuck traffic and the Nantucket boat traffic. So you might have to, I'm not sure that's really coastal erosion, but I think we ought to be thinking of what happens if Jackson Point is no longer usable.
Thank you. We did also have a comment about the need for parking in Madaket for Tuckernuck uses. So any further questions or comments from the public on Tuckernuck, Muskeget, and conservation restrictions? I'm happy to entertain more comments. And again, if I don't see you, you know, send me a chat message, or if you're able to show your video, wave, or if you have to, just unmute and shout out.
Mary?
Yes, Holly, please.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to note that the process for conservation restrictions, or easements as they call them in other locations of the country, are very similar in process for a preservation restriction, same thing. If you're wanting to protect your historic structure or even your historic yard. So they go hand in hand, and personally, I would like to see more and more of them on Nantucket. But that was just my note. Thank you.
And I'll also remind everybody that this meeting is recorded and will be available to view on the town's YouTube channel after it concludes and is posted there. Okay, anything further on this topic before we move on? And let me offer a huge thank you to the members of the public who joined us today. You know, I've never been to Tuckernuck or Muskeget, and I really appreciate hearing from the people who are most heavily invested there.
Come for the bird count tomorrow.
Thank you, Dick. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next topic on our agenda, do we have any public comment for items that we have not already covered?
Hello?
Patricia Knapp, do you want to go ahead?
Okay.
Patricia, do you have a comment for us? Okay, I'm not sure that Patricia is talking to us. I'm going to, okay, she is muted. Anybody else?
Mary?
Yes, Deanne, please go ahead.
I just wanted to let the members of the committee know that the Coastal Conservancy coordinating team had our listening interview with Arcadis a week ago yesterday afternoon, and we found it very helpful. We felt like we were listened to, and just based on our experience, we just think it's an enormously important part of the process. And Vince was there, which was even more helpful. So I just recommend the interview to whoever is going to be interviewed. We did prepare by asking members of our team sort of what issues they would like to bring up. And we tried to organize that a little bit ahead of time because we only had an hour and we wanted the conversation to be a quality one. So we might make that suggestion to anyone else who still has their interviews ahead of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanne. I appreciate the feedback. It's good to hear that that went well. Arcadis is in their information gathering stage, and they have interviews scheduled with a number of island organizations. And I believe, Vince, are you participating in all of them or just as available?
As many as I can. I think I might just miss one on the 5th of January. But I don't plan on missing any if I can possibly help it. And just to catch up on one of Deanne's, well, first of all, to say thank you very much to Deanne for participating, but it's not the only chance for certain groups to participate. And if anyone at any point even wants to participate or get in touch with myself and Arcadis or Arcadis, by all means. And Deanne, if you have any more comments written, otherwise, please forward them on. Have to get all the feedback we can, and we welcome it. And again, thank you to Coastal Conservancy for participating, and looking forward to chatting to others in the future.
Thank you, Vince. Okay, if there are no further public comments, last call here, we will move on to the next topic, which is the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee Education Subcommittee. That is chaired by Sarah Boyce. Sarah, do you want to have a beginning statement, or do you want to take questions, or where do we want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'll just, I don't have anything formal as an introductory statement other than to say the reason this is on the agenda was just, you know, we had originally instituted the education subcommittee when there was a lot of other things that the full committee was working on and dealing with and editing. And so we wanted to have for those of us interested to start to kind of do some more education and outreach work. And so the proposal to kind of re-envelop that group into the full committee is more because for two reasons. There was Graham and Mary have requested that they're going to sunset their time in the subcommittee as of January. And because the full committee is still in an information gathering phase, but a lot of the work has gone to Arcadis in terms of their data gathering. And we're going to, not in a hiatus, but we're in a like paused period of active work while we wait for the different segments of the plan to review. I thought it would be a good time for the full committee to start to think about our role as the education and outreach, and what if any we want to come out of the full committee. And the only other thing I'll say in terms of discussion is that at this time there are a lot of other groups on island, like the Resilient Nantucket group, Acclimate, and then individual organizations that are doing a lot of like the outreach and education. And so I thought it would be a good time to discuss whether or not that's a role the CRAC committee does, or if we just educate or put out what we're working on. So I just thought it was open for discussion, since this as a topic has been evolving on the island in the last year and a half, 2 years. So that was sort of open for discussion, and happy to answer questions about what the education committee has been able to accomplish so far, and what we had talked about priorities that we haven't worked on yet.
And I'll add, speaking as a subcommittee member, there are two things that made the subcommittee much more difficult. One is COVID. We can't meet in person to hash things out. It makes it hard to design things. The other is that with a 3-person subcommittee, 2 people is a quorum, and so you can't have an individual conversation, which means that we have to meet, but it's hard to meet. So it's been difficult to operate under this structure. Let me just say it that way.
I think it's a really good point, Mary. Thank you.
Yeah. So speaking for the entire committee, my perspective is that I think it is a good plan to reintegrate that goal of education back into the entire committee. But as Sarah said, if there are questions or comments, let's have a discussion about that. Jen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mary. I think what Sarah's proposed seems to make sense, particularly with the idea of how complicated it was for a subcommittee to meet of a committee like this. And if instead we're having the discussions at our committee level and parsing out tasks, I think it takes that maybe that piece of bureaucratic tape out of hindering the process. It seems to make sense from my standpoint. I think education is probably a big piece of what we can do as CRAC, particularly as the consultants start ramping up their public outreach pieces, how we can help facilitate that and be that voice piece. And I think even what we're doing today, talking about particular places around the island, kind of fits into that education piece that we're trying to do. The one question I guess I would have for you guys, are there particular objectives that the subcommittee was in process of implementing that we should talk about moving forward? And if there were things you hadn't gotten to that would make sense for us to start working on in the new year?
I think, thanks, Jen. I think that's a great question. And we had sort of, when we first met, brainstormed ideas of what we could do and then prioritized what we could do. And the first thing that we're working on that is closer to completion, that we actually spent a lot of our time on, was making like a brochure that is not guidelines, but suggestions for helping your home with like flooding and that kind of thing. So it's using a lot of the materials that are already out there from other locations, and it doesn't deal with any of the historic structures, but more like, placing your valuables higher and thinking about how you're, sorry, I'm like looking at the old draft we have. I'm not showing it right now because it's still in a draft phase, because we were waiting on some finalized design. Florencia was helping us with from the town. So obviously once COVID hit, Florencio was quite busy. So there's been a lot, like a lot of things with COVID, everything was paused a bit. But so we, as a committee, kind of went round and round with this, and we felt that it was in a good stage to present like a more finalized version to this full committee. So I think that's the only product that will mainly come from that subcommittee. The next thing that we had talked, and in addition to kind of being a infographic that has like suggestions that you can do, there are pieces of information about what the committee is and what it's about and who it serves, and has links to information. So it was like an infographic that's helpful, but really another kind of thing that we could get out that explains to people what the full committee is. And then the second thing that we were talking about doing we had a sort of prioritized list, but was a landscape brochure. Maybe not landscape isn't the right words, but like suggestions for landscaping in the interest of sea level rise. So things that people might want to consider. And so it's once again, not reinventing the wheel, adopting a lot of suggestions from other communities that have worked on this, but then adapt it to Nantucket vegetation specifics, that kind of thing. So we didn't really get anywhere with that other than I had started to compile a list of other resources that we can use to kind of build that out. So that's kind of the next thing that we did. If we do end up talking more about this in another meeting or adding it to an agenda, we can circulate kind of some of the notes from what we had talked about at our first meetings. And I know Graham's not on here right now, but the other thing that we had talked about in general was putting out a sheet or like a one-page PDF that is some of the factual information. So that either the committee's adopted, it sort of goes along with the guidelines that the select board adopted, but has some of the maybe bullet points of like, we didn't make it, so it's just not creative, but it was more of the science-based fact information that Nantucket is using, that we are considering, that people should know about. That's in, all of that information is already available on many websites that are available through the town. But we thought if there's like a one-pager that was like stamped with the CRAC committee logo, that would be a good source that we could circulate to, homeowners, agencies, organizations, that kind of thing. But we didn't get that far yet. So those are some of the things we were talking about doing.
I think Mary's muted up, but I was hoping she was giving me permission. Just to offer one, I don't know what I call a suggestion, piece of advice, or request, possibly a request more than anything. I get a lot of calls and I talk to a lot of people, and the biggest problem I constantly get, aside from how you're going to stop the flooding, is, what are you doing? I've never heard about this. So I'm getting this constantly. We're 3 months into a coastal resilience plan. We've had lots of meetings about it. I'm in the process of getting web pages up and other information out there. But my single biggest constant problem is we're not hitting enough people. And that was one of the things that I really liked and was really hopeful for with the Education and Communication Subcommittee. And it's something that I'd like an answer. How are we going to continue with this if it's folded into the main group? And one of the only ways I could suggest it is if there could be a recurring topic item about having education and outreach, or education and communication, or any particular phrasing to suit that, come up every once in a while to meet that, and so that we can discuss it, or so the committee can discuss it and keep the message moving. It is the biggest problem I have, that outreach just isn't hitting enough people.
Thank you, Vince. That's a great point. And thank you for reminding me I'd muted myself. Other comments around the education goals? Fritz?
I was just a suggestion, if we haven't already tried it, that Vince, to what Vince was speaking about. What about interviews, letter to the editor, or whatever we could get from the Inky Mirror, probably Mary or Vince, probably. Same thing would be interview on radio, local radio. They do interviews on topics, and I think a lot of people listen to those segments. So it might, those may only be 2 or 3 minute. That might be just a 2 or 3 minute segment or interview, but chances are it would get to a lot of people and doesn't involve too much work.
We actually did get interviewed, but that's a whole nother. That was a year ago, I think. Sarah, and then Holly.
Yeah, just to Fritz's point, we did talk a lot about, and I think it was at the beginning of our education subcommittee, about all the ways that we could get out information. And I think we wanted to have a product as our first introduction. So not obviously like the work that Vince is doing and Mary and you guys have been doing interviews generally about the crack committee. But I think as a constant, like we wanted to kind of keep being present so that and people are aware of the committee, so that when there are public meetings that Arcadis is seeking information for, it's not the first time they've heard of the committee. And so I think that was why we wanted like some products to shop out, kind of, like not like this first brochure is going to be earth-shattering information, like, if you live in a flood-prone area, don't put all your valuables on the first floor in the garage. I don't know. But at the same time, having that you can then bring to the table, put on social media. We don't have a social media account, but if we have a product that's like a PDF, we can, through all of our different organizations, through the town, through our associated other groups that we work with, can kind of put that out there, and that's another way to get that message out, and like do a radio interview about the product that we're putting out, and also all the other work that the crack does.
Thank you, Sarah. Holly, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to emphasize the Acclimate group. Some of us are members of that group, either representing your local organization or the town. I think they are a great asset about being able to push information out there. I also do know that, as you all are aware with Resilient Nantucket, I've been really adamant since day one when we created the RFP for that MVP project, as well as creating the RFP for the Coastal Resiliency Plan, is to have that segue and making sure that preservation was part of the conversation for both aspects. And with that, we're lucky to be able to have the same folks. As you all know, the Craig Group is one of our consultants for Resilient Nantucket, which is also one of the co-consultants for the Coastal Resiliency Plan. And they're also the ones that are going to be before you all next month for the toolkit, and that toolkit is going to be very imperative. And I guess my mention to this is there's anything that we can kind of do jointly. For instance, one of the members of the coordinator for Acclimate also is I guess I would say a consultant with the Craig Group as well. So there's a lot of this tie-in together, which is very helpful, especially in the day and age of Zoom and getting technology out there. Also, if there's something that this group wants to have pushed out, I know our public outreach coordinator, Florencia, is very busy with COVID, but she's pretty good about, getting stuff out there when we ask for it, at least from a pushing it on social media, putting on the webpage. So she is there. I wanted to mention from an education standpoint, as the HMP coordinator, that is something that education and outreach is imperative and is requested from a FEMA's perspective. And there's one thing that is addressed as a priority within the HMP that is wanting to get more STEM education within the public schools. That is something that once we adopted the HMP was provided to the schools, but of course, like everything else, things kind of go to the side, and I know that they do stuff when they can, but maybe that's something that the your now entire group education of CRAC can work on, and
Holly,
maybe some.
Quick question. Is there funding associated with the hazard mitigation plan for education and outreach?
Not for that particular item, no. But I will say this, and I think both Vince and I are in the same boat, we get bombarded with a lot of different, resiliency is the topic. Resiliency has been the topic in the planning world, in the science world. I think every day I'm looking at things, and I know I actually received an email from somebody from Resilient Cities, looking at from the preservation world, as well as just, even in the natural and built environment. So what my point is there are grants and funding sources that are available that we can pursue and look into. Thank you for bringing that up, because I will say this, I always have the back of my head from town admin. It's great and all to have some sort of priority, but how is it going to be funded? So I just wanted to bring that all up there. Do know that our HMP, we still have a few more years to try to address all those priorities. We've been doing a fantastic job. I think even with COVID in mind, this MVP project for Resilient Nantucket, this is an action grant that we got from the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth has been a front runner when it comes to trying to have our communities, especially our coastal communities, out there. So we've got places within the Commonwealth that are looking at Nantucket. So I just wanted to mention all that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Holly. And let's go to Fritz.
Just to Holly, I just mentioned, I may have mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. Egan Maritime supports a program in the Nantucket Public Schools and the private schools as well. But especially a dedicated teacher in the middle school for maritime education, and that curriculum has included such things as wave propagation, dune studies. They did a study regarding. I see her shaking her head, so I think you know about it. But what I would suggest, and that's in a little bit of a hiatus right now because the teacher we had has been promoted to administration, and we're trying to figure out who the next, together with the school committee and the principal, trying to figure out who that next teacher might be. And with COVID, that's going a little slower than might otherwise have been. But I would really encourage Acclimate or us or whomever, to the extent we're interested in STEM education, to contact Pauline Prosch and at Egan and just see what can be done, because I think it's open, and it seems to me that coastal resilience, maritime education, the things that have been done in the school all really tie together. So,
thank you, Fritz. Sarah.
Yeah, Fritz, I think that's a really, really good point. And I will just say, outside of this group, through my work at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, I'm the Director of Research and Education. And I know that myself and Emily Molden, who's on this, and RJ Turcott, we've all been in a few different meetings with Pauline and with Acclimate, talking about different educational initiatives. And so the discussion has started, not necessarily with CRAC directly involved, but a lot of us that are part of CRAC and part of both Acclimate and maybe our day jobs also, we're talking about this a lot. And some of it started before COVID, some of it happened during COVID, where we were on a lot of different Zoom meetings, but the conversations are happening about how we can bring this to especially the public schools. I just know from my personal work that the public schools aren't taking a lot of extra things on because it's just the bare minimum. I mean, also as a parent, get all the emails from school. They're just trying to make school happen at all. So I think it's really a good point for the planning phases now. while school is totally remote. And there are things, there's plenty of things that can be done remotely, but I think a lot of us that are doing that as the informal educators are in the planning phase now until the public school is ready to receive that. Because I think they're kind of overwhelmed, as you can imagine.
Okay, does somebody want to make a motion then to dissolve the education subcommittee? Is that the right approach, Vince? Any idea? I think we'd have to actually resolve to have it cease. We can't just stop meeting.
Yes, I think a motion on that front would be good, because it was originally came from a motion set up by the full committee. And could I ask if there would be a replacement item recurring in the agenda or something similar, just to maintain the
I think we should have that as a recurring topic. But Sarah, if you want to make that motion, and then we can have somebody second it.
I have to make the motion to dissolve my own committee. No, I'm just kidding. I make the motion to dissolve the education subcommittee.
And do we have a second?
I'd second that.
Thank you, Fritz. All those in favor?
Sarah, would you rather have somebody else make the motion to dissolve the
committee? Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I made the proposal. It's fine.
Yeah. All right. If there's not any further discussion, Gary, yes, go ahead, Gary, with a question.
Was Sarah talking about folding the education committee into the communication committee? Do we have a communication committee or not?
No.
We don't.
So the full committee would simply resume responsibility for any of the duties that were assigned to the education subcommittee.
Okay. My vote is aye.
Thank you, Gary. Sarah?
Aye.
Peter? Peter, we have you muted. There you go.
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you. So we formed it, I think, in January of this year. We're dissolving it in December. It had a year's run, but what a year it was. So, okay, we did have 2 comments in the chat that I want to read into the record. Is Beverly Damon still with us? I don't see her. So she offered a suggestion that we reach out and appoint a volunteer from both the Tuckanuck Landowners Association and the Tuckanuck Land Trust to be the liaisons to help inform and educate the CRAC's work on Tuckanuck. So we can take that as a suggestion, Vince. That may be covered through the interviews with Arcadis. I don't know, but I wanted to make that comment so it gets into the record. The second comment was from Claire Johnson. She said she's calling in from Germany. Thank you very much for making this Zoom available, and to all for your hard work and the information you've provided. So I think both of them have left the meeting at this point. Okay, do we have committee reports? Fritz, do you want to say anything about Harbor Place that was discussed at NPNEDC yesterday? The Harbor Place report from the Nantucket Historical Commission was sent out to the members of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee.
Yes, just briefly. And I would mention that, I'm trying to remember, Arcadis will be meeting or having an interview with the planning board at its next meeting, I think, Vince. I know it's scheduled. And so that is on the agenda. And hopefully we will give the opportunity for the planning board, members of the planning board to fully understand what's going on, the effect of our committee's recommendation to the select board, or what the effects may be, and also an introduction to Arcadis and how the whole process will move forward. Since I assume planning and zoning will be some element of the coastal resilience plan. So I think I'd leave it at that, Mary, unless you wanted me to, unless you wanted to
anything further on Harbor Place?
Okay.
On Harbor Place, Fritz, was there anything you wanted to add specific to that?
I'm sorry. Yeah. On Harbor, well, just generally the Harbor Place is back on the agenda, and in terms of the town planning review, there have been some recent developments in terms of change of ownership of the land from
Winthrop to NIR, was it?
Yes,
yeah.
Right. And that the owners of the land down in the former A&P, now Stop and Shop, and that Tank Farm are interested in pursuing development. And so that's fully on the agenda. And there was a discussion regarding, Mary and I both had raised issues regarding coastal resilience and how that might be, how that might impact or that development.
Thank you, Fritz. Gary, you're muted at the moment.
Sorry. With respect to that harbor place, I have been all along a fan of that whole concept, since I think that part of the waterfront ought to be used more effectively than it is today. And that report that Vince sent around was a very thorough report. What it basically said to me is that the complexity of dealing with all of the regulations that need to be satisfied in order to really accomplish what some of the goals of the harbor place process are, means that we won't see that for maybe 5 to 8 years if it goes forward at all. So it's really when I look at the complexities of all of the regulatory things that have to get done, I'm a little saddened because I don't think it's going to happen in the proper kind of a timetable. That's all I'd like to say about that.
I think that one thing that Andrew Vorse offered at last night's Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Council meeting was that the owners have the ability to go forward with approval not required plans. So it may be correct that we won't see a massive redevelopment happen soon, but they do have the option to develop within the current zoning, which is RC, residential commercial. And that's something that we need to be aware of. It's not impossible for them to decide what to do with the site if they choose not to integrate into a larger scale development. Peter? Deanne, we'll come back to you in a moment. Thank you. And Peter first, please.
Yeah, how up to speed and cued in are the owners in regards to what we're doing and them working with us and whatever they have planned for development, whether it's going to be something this year or in 8 years. I want to assume that they're going to work with us, but I don't know.
Let's go to Holly. She might be able to answer that, and then we'll go back to Deanne.
So I can just, thank you, Madam Chair. I can speak to that a little bit. As far as the current owners, I spoke to a representative from NIR and a representative from National Grid about a year ago about Resilient Nantucket and about Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee and the upcoming CRP project. And that was even obviously way before you all provided that recommendation to the select board. So they have had it on their radar. I can also tell you through the consultant that's been working with town admin and towns, the select board's work group that they have about this project, Weston and Sampson, that they're well aware of your efforts in the coastal resiliency plan. So they know, they know.
Thank you, Holly. Back to you, Deanne.
Thank you, Mary. I did have occasion to hear the chair of the Historical Commission give the report of their subcommittee about the Harbor Place project. And she had done a considerable amount of research at the state level in regard to rights the public have in this property, because this land are filled tidelands and there are also filled Commonwealth tidelands. Now, I'm not exactly sure of the difference, but I know that Chapter 91 is a huge regulatory framework that we need to consider, and it has to do with public access to the water and water dependent uses. So while the property owners may have the right to do an approval not required, there are some regulatory structures that they have to follow. And quite frankly, Nantucket has not had a good record in terms of asserting our Chapter 91 rights. So I see that this might be an area of intersection between that project and CRAC. And I just hope that you will pursue it in some way. What is the best way to do? I don't know.
Thank you, Deanne. Vince, I think you can address a couple of those points with the harbor management plan, and then some kind of community, I'm forgetting the name of it, that was mentioned by Hillary Rayport in her report from the Historical Commission. Yeah,
the harbor management plan that's currently slated for, I think, funding this coming year, so for 2022, that will address part of it. I'm going to have to say as well, I'm going to have to go off and do some more reading and some more research. When Deanne was talking about flooded tidelands that were formerly Commonwealth flooded tidelands, I didn't understand that. I'm going to have to get more information.
That's in the report from the Historical Commission that we just received. So, and can somebody help me out with there's another program which Nantucket has not participated in, but which the Historical Commission is moving forward with trying to become qualified for. Holly, can you help me out with the name of that?
Certified local government.
That's it. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. We are applying to the National Park Service through the Massachusetts Historical Commission, our SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, to become what we call a certified local government under the eyes of the National Park Service. And this is something, quite frankly, I've always wondered why Nantucket wasn't. The fact that we're a National Historic Landmark, we're the second local historic district in the country, technically, after Charleston, South Carolina, why we never were one. And the fact that we have an active HDC, an active Historical Commission. Both commissions agreed, and we're going to be finalizing that application to MHC. And this will give us more availability to federal grants. So for instance, there is a federal grant going through all states right now, but they are required, the states are required to give 10% of their allotted money from the feds to certified local government. So we've actually applied for a grant, and we're actually been accepted for the second round, and hopefully we can get our CLG application in, and that will give us a little bit better oomph, if you will, with the application process. This requires obviously select board approval. It also requires what we call an MOU between both commissions. I'm compiling the application and trying to get all the resumes and letters of all the commissioners. But yes, that is something that we've been working on, that I brought to the Historical Commission's attention, that this is something that Nantucket can do. So yes, we are actively pursuing that.
And can you say, would that have particular benefits for coastal resilience measures?
Actually right now, the fact that we're a National Historic Landmark gives us a lot of clout and value, if you will, with the certified local, or with the coastal resiliency efforts. So any property can pretty much be exempt from certain building code requirements, provided they go through the historic determination with the HDC. Obviously, burden of proof is on the applicant. Historical documentation is required. It gets reviewed, obviously, by myself, as well as the Historic Structures Advisory Board before it goes to the HDC and for a recommendation. And so there are properties really essentially that could be, if you're not a National Historic Landmark, you have to rely on being a certified local government, because through that process, you actually have to show that preservation, you have an actual ordinance or bylaw that is upholding your historic integrity. So yes, coastal resiliency measures are already there. We're a step above our sister coastal communities on the Cape. Not every single coastal community on Cape Cod is a National Historic Landmark where we are. So there's so much to be understood between the difference between a local historic district and a National Historic Landmark. And we're very fortunate, very, very fortunate in that regards.
Thank you, Holly. Peter, I think the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board is scheduled to meet with Arcadis as well. Do you have any further information on that?
Only that it's on the 19th of January. And after watching, as I'm a member of the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy and taking a part in that with Arcadis presenting to that group, I thought it was a great idea that we all come up with questions and concerns that we bring up with Arcadis, so that they don't just do a generic presentation and walk away with nothing. They need to know who we are and what we do and who we represent. Even though we're an advisory board, they need to know the implications of sea level rise on shellfishing, and of course we're the harbor as well. So at our last meeting, I made sure everybody knew that you need to come up with that stuff by the 19th. So.
Thank you, Peter. Gary, let me check in with you as well. Is the Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers meeting through the winter?
We are, but our subjects right now are not covering coastal resiliency. But I did have a question with respect to a potential meeting with the Arcadis. Are those publicly required Zoom type meetings? In other words, the meeting with the Shellfish Advisory Board, that'll be Zoomed and publicly, yeah. So with respect to the committees that we have, those meetings are all public official meetings and have to be Zoomed so long as there's a quorum. With respect to Arcadis's other meetings with other stakeholder groups, I assume they are not, and therefore they can be more like focus groups. What did you say about that?
Vince, do you want to answer that?
If Pete wants to go first, he can.
Oh, I'm sorry, Peter. Sure.
Gary, because Arcadis is going to present at our our January 19th meeting, it's a public meeting, so anybody can attend, and they'll just be another item on the agenda.
But with respect to the other focus groups that they are talking about,
Vince can address that, I think, Gary.
Yeah. So the way that it worked out was they had to try and prioritize who they were going to meet with first. There was a lot of, I think I even sent around the list to all CRAC members of who was prioritized and who was as priority 1, who was priority 2, and priority 3. Everyone's going to get spoken to. It's just who do you speak to first? As far as I remember, I'm going to open to correction on this. Non-voting taxpayers was tier 2, so that'll be sometime in February, I should think. Just from memory, I'd need to check that, to be perfectly honest. For the most part, if you're meeting with, say, not to pick on anyone in particular, but NCF, that's a private consultant talking to a private group. That was just an in-house meeting for Arcadis, organized by Arcadis, not organized by the town. So they're private meetings as such. Then when we talk to planning board, when we talk to select board on January 6th and on the 19th, then to Harbour and Shellfish Advisory Board, we have to ask to get on their agendas, and then they're the public meetings. Everyone and anyone can attend those meetings as normal. If it generates more interest in those meetings, so be it, and all the better. But for the other ones, they're not. They're private. But what I did have a conversation with Mary and others in Arcadis about, and put the suggestion forward, is because the meetings are not recorded, and they're also not taking minutes, but they are taking notes. I can get a synopsis of those notes if people want them. If committee members want them, I should be very, very clear that these are not for public consumption. They're for if committee members want them. And there would be a synopsis that would have to be agreed in advance between the two bodies, Arcadis and whoever the other private group was that participated.
And just to remind everybody, I wasn't aware at our last meeting when this was brought up, but Vince, as he said, is trying to participate in as many of those meetings as possible so that he will be a conduit for knowing the content and the issues that were raised. So that makes me a lot more comfortable with the process.
Nothing else.
Thank you, Gary. We did have one other public comment offered through the chat. Jennifer Alborn has left the meeting, but I wanted to read this into the record. She's saying, I second Beverly's idea, and that may be an idea to explore to get your message and work out to other areas of the island as well. The different regional areas frequently have local communication methods, e.g. the Sconset Civic Association and or the Sconset Neighborhood on Nextdoor website. And in our tribal inclinations, we may pay more attention to those regional messages than to island-wide. Also, you might try to be a speaker at Rotary. Thank you for inviting the Tuckernuck Land Trust participation in this meeting. Please reach out again as we may be helpful to your work or to connecting with Tuckernuck. I look forward to further conversation. So just reading that remark into the record. If there's nothing else, we can have a motion to adjourn. Vince, before we make a motion, yes, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt at the very last minute, but I wanted to very, very personally thank all committee members for their work through the year. And I also wanted to particularly thank Mary, who attends far more meetings than any of us could probably combined, and for the information that she brings back and sends to me, and a lot of the time asks me to send out to the rest of the committee. Thank you, everyone.
And I'll add my thanks to everyone for bringing these meetings to life. I'm glad that we're not just a bunch of stuffed heads in little squares on a computer screen. So is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes, but first.
What's one thing at a time, Gary? So we'll have a discussion. Yeah. So Peter, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Gary. Is there any discussion that we want to have before we vote, Gary?
Let's have a very safe, happy end of the year and a much better 2021.
We all echo that. Thank you, Gary. Yes. Yeah. And happy holidays to everyone. All right, roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
Mary Longacre votes aye. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next year.
Next year. Yeah.
Bye.